Well, this is Alan Bragwell and his brother Alan here today. My wife Deborah's been saying to me, Alan, quit putting such long posts on Facebook and start recording stuff. And so I was so impressed and affected by my brother Alan's message this past Sunday on Fruitful in the Time of Affliction, or in the Land of Affliction, that I contacted him. I said, could I do an interview and let's just talk a little bit more about what you shared? And so this is my friend Alan Beasley. He's a pastor of First United Methodist Church in Jasper, and we're just glad to be together here today. And Alan, thanks for joining me for a little bit this afternoon.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Alan knows this, but I just want to say to any of y'all that are joining me that the celebration worship that they have on Sunday morning at 8:30 has really been important to me and my family over the last over 3 years now, because of just being homebound with my dad as he went down and not being able to get him to church and go. So even before COVID, we were really plugged in and involved with the online services, and has continued to do that. That's been a big part. So I just appreciate it. I don't think it's going away, Alan. I think that this online thing is gonna continue to grow. Do you think that too?
I think that's correct. I think it will continue to grow, and myself and my staff, we're looking for ways in which to kind of increase our presence, so that we just want to be available for people that aren't comfortable leaving their house yet or going to a large gathering. And so we're looking for ways in which we can be more visible online, just outside of our worship services. And we keep trying to improve that as well.
Have you, when you mine the data from either the 8:30 or the 11 o'clock service, aren't you amazed at not just how many people come on, but like, are you able to see where in the world they click in from?
Yes. Our streaming mechanism allows us to track city and state of everybody that joins us on our website. And that's only on our website. And if I click on a metric on social media, say Facebook or YouTube, unless they comment and I can see who they are and where they are, or they've told me that they're watching, then you really don't know. But on our website, the metric, and generally on a Sunday, we probably have 12 to 15 states represented that watch one of the two services. So,
well, I posted a little thing on Facebook, and I was getting the international hits, like, because I've got some friends like you do overseas, but I was like Scotland and Africa, and I was
right.
like, wow.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Joseph. Your Sunday
Okay.
morning message was I was just writing feverishly in my notes, but you talked about that Joseph was sort of a model for being fruitful in a time of affliction. And
right.
Can you just talk a little bit about how that may interact with where we are right now in 2020, the end of the year?
Sure. Well, if you think about the story of Joseph, he was the least favored child, obviously, and his brothers tried to get rid of him. Essentially, they thought by sending him off to Egypt that he would eventually be killed. I mean, long story short, the complete opposite happened. He began to have favor with the Pharaoh, and that took a lot of, affliction. It took a lot of suffering to get to that point. He just didn't walk into Egypt and all of a sudden be the governor of the entire region. He kind of lived through a lot of suffering and affliction, not only in his present situation, but in relationship to his brothers, to his family. And so if you think about that run-up, that context to Joseph's life, it points to a season. And, I try not to just point to 10 months that we've been in, but to a season. Joseph had been in a season of suffering, affliction, disharmony with his family, all kinds of things. And as I pointed out, things were totally different. He's a young Jewish man who grew up in the Jewish custom, and all of a sudden he's deported to basically a pagan region, a godless region. So everything that he was used to doing, he could do no more. And I think that most of all speaks to where we've been in 10 months is everything, and that has such great application, whether you talk about practical application or spiritual application, everything that we've been used to normally be able to do that we're accustomed to doing, we haven't been able to do the same. We've been able to do some things, but not everything. I think every person can relate to that in terms of what Joseph had been through.
Right. And then as time went on, he had 2 children, and he named them strategically, it seemed. But it is a reflection again of, if we're going to make this comparison of the life of Joseph and what he went through, and maybe try to gain some insight from that for us today. What did he name his children again, and the meanings of those names?
It's important to understand that in biblical times, especially in the Old Testament, people named their children to reflect their situation. They just didn't go grab they didn't go to Barnes and Noble and pick the book of most popular child names and pick one. They named their children to reflect their situation. So he had 2 children. He named one of them Manasseh, which means God has delivered me from the trouble, of my, I'll just read it.
Yeah.
It is because God has made me forget all of my trouble and all my father's household. So see, that points to his affliction with his family. Then the second child was Ephraim. And there's where I got the fruitful piece. I started out really focusing on the fruit, and then I ended up thinking, the first child was as important as the second child, kind of in meaning and a little bit there. And so, but the second child, Ephraim, means because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. And then, as I said, a lot of translations translate that affliction. So depending on how you describe your situation as affliction or suffering, he named those 2 children to reflect the goodness of God in his life, and so that's where the sermon kind of was birthed. And so I just wanted to try to say, okay, we can identify with the affliction. We can identify with being displaced, not doing the things that we've been doing. So as we look back, where can we see fruit? Where are the places where we can see fruit that we could, fill up a fruit basket? And what would be our fruit in that basket?
Yeah. That I was doing the same. I had my Bible there, and I do like you right now. I got it right here. I was looking at that and thinking about just that contrast of how he went from a pit to being
right
second in command. And it is a paradox. And I guess I'd like you to, if you would, to delve into those points that you went through, about how that 4 keys to establishing or maintaining a good direction from the life or the situation of Joseph.
Right.
And the first one that I wrote down in my notes, and I can't remember if it matches yours, was reevaluate priorities. So if we can be like Joseph in 2021, moving ahead, just kind of launch off that a little bit and talk a little bit about what that could mean for us in the midst.
Yeah, I think that we early on, especially when most things were shut down. I mean, we're closed, shut down, whatever. We spent a lot of time at home, had a lot of time to reflect. And I think that began a process where we began to evaluate. And then as things opened back up, we looked at the things that didn't open back up, and we had to say, okay, what are the most important things to us? What are my priorities? What are the things that are most important to us? Which kind of is the second point. When you begin to focus on your priorities, you kind of naturally move to those things which are most important.
Mm-hmm.
And my what I want people to hear is that the Bible says, don't dwell on the past, but it also says learn from the past, not dwell on it.
Yep.
And I don't think we need to forget these months that we're still in. I mean, we're not out of them yet. We're still in them. I mean, we're obviously going to be there for a little bit, but I don't think we need to just leapfrog back in anticipation that we can leapfrog back into everything that we call normal and expect that to be fruitful. I think if we want to continue to live fruitful lives, we'll learn from this time where we focused on what is my priority? What do I have to do to make my family, make my job, make my relationship, what do I need to do to make that most healthy? And when I discover that, then I'll say, I did so many things that maybe I don't have to do everything and be as happy and content. And, I just don't think we need to anticipate we can just go back and we be in the same position we're in today.
Right. The decisions, even though as he, I'm thinking about Joseph being elevated to the place he was at, but then anticipating they were in the 7 good years and getting ready for what was coming, he had to make decisions. I mean, strategic decisions, because they were coming to him. What do we do with all this grain and, store
Right.
it and do all this? So even though we're anticipating that God's going to be with us, we still have to make decisions that are going to be important. They're forks in the road. And one of those you pointed out was the importance of relationships, I believe.
Right. Yeah, I think we start with, yesterday was it was a tough day to be a pastor at Jasper First Methodist Church. We had 3 different deaths, tragedies that happened in the life of our church yesterday. Oh, no. And somebody sent me an email that said, Alan, when you sent those prayer requests out, it is a constant reminder of how valuable life is. And we just need to make sure that we're paying attention to those things that are most precious to us. And our relationships are. And oftentimes relationships get fractured, or they get cut off totally, or, they just are barely hanging on. And I think what this fruit out of this season could be would help us to understand how important our relationships are horizontally with all the people that touch our lives, and that we really need to make efforts, to nurture and to strengthen those relationships, and not just take them for granted, not just say, oh, I can do without that relationship. That's not an important person in my life. Well, maybe it is. Maybe that person that you don't deem as important is looking to you for importance. And so that's the thing that we often miss, is we don't know how people view the relationship from their perspective, because we may look at it as a throwaway relationship, and that other person is thinking, my relationship with Alan Beasley or Alan Bragwell or whoever it might be, many days keeps me going, in a positive direction one more day. And we just don't know those people. And so my thought is we really need to work on, building, maintaining, restoring relationships, all those words that you could use to fill in a relationship. So,
I mean, one of the things that I'm, as much as anything personally, doing is in this season, because that word is a buzzword for me, season, is, now that COVID apparently is spiking in Alabama, whereas it, from March to, in my memory, from March to July, it was getting bad, but it's just not like it is now. Mm-hmm. And so it's like every time I check social media, please pray for this one, please pray for that one. And I mean, I don't have to tell you that, because you just told us a while ago what happened today or yesterday. So all of us now are getting people in our circle that have had COVID or recovering from COVID. And so, I mean, I'm just encouraging people. We have a little Facebook group of people that graduated from my class at Bradshaw, and we've got a couple of people that one's got COVID that's recovering, and another one is it's non-COVID. But you know, it's this we're praying for each other, and I'm encouraging people. Some folks are a little bit isolated to have been through the holidays because of different seasons. I say, if you know somebody that's got COVID, call them, just check on them. I mean, which sounds kind of, you know, it's sort of like, well, we do that anyway, but sometimes we don't. And especially for folks that are hospitalized, if they're able to communicate, you know how that is. I mean, depending on the hospital, some of them around here, if it's a non-COVID, they're letting like one person in. If they're COVID, they're not letting any visitors in. And so,
yeah, let me tell you a quick story related to yesterday to prove your point immensely. So we had a person pass away yesterday from COVID-related complications. He'd been in the hospital since December the 3rd. And on December the 10th, his wife asked me if I would call the main desk where he was and see if they could free somebody up to go in his room to answer the phone and let me talk and pray with him.
Oh, yes.
So I did. I mean, it was a complicated thing. I thought once or twice it wasn't gonna happen, but it finally happened. So long story short, he just couldn't recover from the devastation of the lung damage related and passed away yesterday. His wife told me today that I might have been the last person that talked with him.
Oh, man.
Now, tell me that doesn't prove your point. Just call, just do something. You know, she said, you know, Alan, I think the best we can figure out as far as a conversation, and he was able to talk to me. This was on a Thursday. He went into ICU on Sunday. And of course, he was totally isolated then and never recovered. So she said, the best we can tell is that you probably had the last conversation with him that anybody had. So it is so important. And, you know, people hear, you know, us professional types say that, and they think sometimes, well, they're just saying that because that's their job. They're just saying that because it sounds, no. And I think that's one of the realities we've come to in these 10 months is fruit, the value of relationships. Yes. And maybe, you know, people that watch this or people that heard the sermon Sunday, maybe it prompted them to think of a person or two. Hey, I need to reconnect, or I need to make better. You know, I need to grow further that relationship. So
you and I have talked about my experience after my heart surgery at Emory and how I spent Christmas Eve night in 2015 by myself. And so even though I haven't had COVID and been hospitalized, I have had that little bit of an experience of being alone,
right,
isolated, not from the staff, but my family, you know, they just couldn't be there. And Deb was, the shuttle wouldn't run into the hospital that night because it's Christmas Eve. But, this is where I want us to just go as we kind of wrap up, although we could talk 2 hours on this. This is great.
Yeah.
Was that the net effect of being alone that night was that when I look back now, I see that I drew closer to the Lord by myself, which makes no sense because we, in our culture here in the Deep South, you know, we surround, you know, people are sick, casseroles and send food. And this is so contrary to our experience of being, and it's not good. You know, I'm not saying it's okay, but even though in the midst of that, I think God can manifest his presence and that we don't have to feel like we're alone. So you had mentioned that part of this whole deal, maybe about being fruitful in the time of affliction, is that we really can draw closer to the Lord in the middle of all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that applies in several different areas. First of all, in the simple idea of it helped us realize that when we read in Scripture that God will never leave us nor forsake us, that's really true. that even in our aloneness, even in our isolation, we can always understand that he is with us. And I think when that happens, then then I think it begins to bear fruit. And then in our isolation, quarantine, you'll understand this, Alan. I thought of, and I'm going to talk about this with another group on Friday. Many years ago, Matt Redman wrote a song called The Heart of Worship, and he talked about, what are we going to do when everything is stripped away? How are we going to worship? How's our relationship with God going to be?
Wow.
Well, if you track what mega churches did during this time, the first few weeks, they tried to do their normal thing. They were on stage, they had all the big production, they had everything going on. But over time, they narrowed it down. They stripped away, in essence, all their worship and said, it's time to focus on God. It's time to quit focusing on the production. It's time to quit focusing on the quality of the music. It's time to quit focusing on everything but just you and your relationship with God. And I think that's happened to all of us. And, on another day, maybe we can talk about, how that manifested itself in the whole area of prayer for me. I kind of been on a neat prayer journey in my own life in the past 3 years, but this past year, 2020, as I focused in on my relationship with God, I just felt God really calling me to pray and to encourage people to pray and to pray boldly, to pray, approach the throne of grace with boldness, to receive mercy and find grace. And so I think that's kind of true for everybody. And, I think on a downside, you don't want negativity in this interview, but I think on the downside, what's happened is many church leaders have been exposed during this time of not being able to do what we just got through talking about. They hadn't been able to pivot into a more focus on just their relationship with God. They've tried to, they tried to keep everything normal. They've tried to keep everything the same. And I think it's exposed a lot of church leaders. And as a pastor, that's a little bit sad to have to say, but I just think it's the truth. And so I think I've really learned that last point is that during these last 10 months, hopefully a piece of fruit is that our relationship with God has been strengthened. So,
and to wrap it up, you did it again this morning with your the devotion for Advent for today. The word new, you got on that word new,
right?
And that's, to me, that's what, to tag what you just said, is I think God's saying, hey, I'm making all things new.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do this. This is going. We've got to be thinking. And one of my memories from the scripture says, and having tasted, I think it's Luke's account where he said, and having tasted the new, they will say the old is better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're at a real place where I think God's wanting us to think about what's new and what he can do,
right,
even in the midst of all this mess.
Yeah. All of us Christ followers for many years have known that text where God is making all things new, but we've essentially ignored it because we've wanted things to be the way they were. But I think we're at a critical, pivotal point in the church, in our own life, in the life of Christianity as a whole, where we better be willing to see what God is doing new.
Yes.
What God is doing new. And that's going to be so important. Amen. Yeah. I just think that's going to be really important.
Tell us, for those that are with us still, how, if I wanted to check in with the celebration worship, how could I find that tell us how to find you. 3
ways. On Facebook, our church page is Jasper First UMC. We'll go live there. On YouTube, same name, Jasper First UMC. or you can go to our website, Jasper First UMC, all spelled out, .com. And there's a live link right there on our website, and you can watch it. So, and I kind of think what we've learned is that the beauty of live streaming on multiple platforms is that they all archive their events. And so if you miss it at 8:30, you can watch it at 9:30, or you can watch it at 10:30 or whatever. And we look, and that's kind of one of the new things God's teaching me is that, I can't get sideways if somebody watches at 12:30 in the afternoon and not 8:30 in the morning.
Right.
I mean, I've just had to get over that. Although I do think, and this is kind of the paradox of where we are, kind of maybe the paradox, the dilemma. I do think there is value for a person and their worship experience if they will plug in when the majority of the body is plugging in, even if they're watching online.
Sure.
I think there's some increased value to that.
Yeah.
And I found that out Sunday. We did totally on virtual Sunday, and in fact, pre-recorded it. So Lori and I watched here, and we made sure we watched at 8:30. And I think that added to the value of what we do. And so I still think that, but at the same time, I think we've learned to give people flexibility in how they're worshiping and when they're worshiping.
I agree. And I'll tell you, and I know you know this, but just because, like, if you're on Facebook and it says how many people are how many are clicked in, there were times when my family, we were together, and there may have been one click on the Facebook tally, but there were 4 people watching it in my living room at that time.
Right.
So, one of my family members, when I turned it on, I said, we're going to watch that other thing. And she said, "This is First Methodist Church." And I said, "Yes, it is."
Yeah, it is.
It was great. And
so I just, this probably getting too long, but so as I was watching Sunday, I'm sitting in my living room, I'm watching Sunday. So I'm watching, how many people are on, and I just looked at the comments, and I kind of did a quick calculation based on the comments about how many people that represented,
right.
Assuming that like a husband was with a wife and so on and so forth. And on an average, because we have single people watching, but on an average, it was about 2 people, for the whole group watching, it was about a little over 2 people per click or per person watching. So it's amazing. It's got an incredible reach. I mean, Christmas Eve obviously was a time when everybody wanted to worship,
Yes.
we did 2 services, and between the services, we probably had 500 views, and that doesn't count the people that were in person. So,
we were at the 6 o'clock. We were with you at 6.
Yeah. So, so it's, I think, like you said early on, that's going to be a continuing phenomenon. We have to make sure we hang in there with.
Great. Well, we got to go, but Alan, thanks for joining me. And I will let you know how I get this posted.
Okay.
And look forward to good comments. And again, thanks for joining me. And hopefully we're going to get down there in person after things kind of mellow out a little bit on the surge, and looking forward to it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Enjoyed being with you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.